Well, our readings for this week provide us that beautiful image of God's plan for marriage. Those words from Genesis should really touch and strike our hearts. The way that man and woman were made for each other, made to come together in one flesh, made for marriage, marriage made for life, in sickness and health, in good times and in bad, as we're familiar with from the wedding vows itself. And one thing about being a part of this parish has been the chance to have many funerals, not so many weddings, but at those funerals able to see couples who were married for 50, 60, even 66, I think probably even maybe 70 years of marriage. To see couples who lived that out till death do them part, again as the wedding vows themselves state. And so that is a beautiful gift of God's plan for marriage, for what it's meant for. And yet we also see the ugly side. We see how sin distorts the picture in the gospel today. As Jesus says, hardness of heart has come into the world. That, what is sinfulness but a hardness of heart? That when our hearts harden, we change our way of living. We change from God's way of living, I should say, really, to our own way of living. And this is really what a hardened heart is about. We live no longer according to God's ways, but according to our own ways. And in God's ways, everything is meant to be received as a gift. Everything is meant to be received and used according to God's plan and according to how He calls us to use them and to participate in them. But in human ways, of course, we don't look at things that way. In our fallen human state, we instead think that we have the choice all the time, that we get to decide how we can live marriage, how we can live sexuality. And this leads to the hardness of heart that Jesus condemns in the gospel today. It leads to the sexual dysfunction that comes from the sexual revolution that we've experienced in our culture for these 50, 60 years now, with divorce, contraception, fornication, homosexual activity, all these ways that we turn from God's plan and go and try and live our own view of marriage and sexuality. And the brokenness, the hurt, the pain that causes, what seems enjoyable in the short term, in fact, turns into pain in the long term. And that's why the Lord condemns these things. This is why the Lord, by condemning divorce and remarriage as adultery, is pointing out the fact that we can't live according to our own ways, but need to live according to God's ways. Ironically, this is the merciful thing when the culture that we live in would call it unmerciful. The church is often would be considered hard of heart or unmerciful for not allowing divorce and remarriage, or for not allowing same-sex marriage, or whatever different type of thing is out there now that's accepted by the culture. But the culture says that that's unmerciful. But no, it's not living according to the ways of God that is where the mercy of God is meant to be found. See, the mercy of God is found by turning to His ways, not thinking that we can do as we wish and thinking everything will turn out all right. No, in fact, it's God's ways that show us what love is meant to be, what love is all about. That love is meant to be received as a gift, lived as a gift, and lived according to God's ways. Now, of course, our readings are very appropriate for us today as we have this first Sunday of October, which is Respect Life Month, and this is Respect Life Sunday. And of course, we know that the negative fruits of the sexual revolution have included attacks on life, particularly the attack of abortion against human life. So I want to reflect on that need to respect and protect human life, particularly this week, talking about abortion, I'll talk about some other threats to life in the preceding weeks of October here. But what are some very simple, practical ways that we can stand up for the goodness of life? Obviously, the first thing we need to do is, for those who are married, for those who are in that state, to respect life by their own living their life of faith in their family, by their welcoming of children, by not using contraception, by being open to life in the ways that married people are called to. Then, of course, there's also the standing up against the legality of abortion. We'll be participating in the 40 Days for Life throughout this month. We have 4 different times, each time a different week, a different day, a different time, so that hopefully as many people can participate in that 40 Days for Life and going down and actually praying outside the Planned Parenthood clinic for those young women and for those couples that are going in for abortions. We can also, of course, contact the representatives. There's much evil legislation being proposed right now to expand abortion. You know, one of those euphemistic titles, again, of the Women's Health Protection Act, which is trying to put, basically abortion on demand as the law throughout the whole United States. And just the most extreme abortion law that's ever been proposed just passed the House of Representatives and now is going to the Senate. So we have to pray and contact the representatives about legislation such as that, and really any legislation which now is trying to put abortion funding into even the funding bills that are being put out there for votes as well. Of course, we can also be open to life in terms of adoption and foster children. I recently just saw a statistic that this is really speaking about evangelical Christians only, but they said if every evangelical Christian family or couple, adopted just one child, that would pretty much solve the foster system, or have every child in the United States would have a home to live in. So, that's something for us to really think about. Maybe you're called to be a adopted parent or a foster parent for someone, for a child who's in need. Of course, there's also various pregnancy resource centers, places that help young women who have decided to keep their baby but do need assistance, but do need help. There's the Women's Choice Network, which has a location in Monroeville and a location on the north side. There's a couple other locations as well to help these women. Maybe you want to donate your time. There's volunteer opportunities at these places. There's, of course, a chance to donate finances or to donate baby clothes, baby products, things that are needed for these young families, these young children. There's also Birthright, which is in Oakland, that does these similar things as well. We even have a few homes in Pittsburgh that help young women who need a place to live in those early years. So there's the Genesis Home, which the Pittsburgh Catholic actually has an extensive article about in the Pittsburgh Catholic online edition this week. You can find an article on the Genesis Home that's been around for a while. And there's a newer home called Mary's Place, which just opened in the last, I think, year or two, which also now helps house young women with children who are in need of a place to stay. And so these are some of the things that we can do to continue to protect, promote, and respect human life, particularly in its earliest stages, to recognize that we all should be doing something. We all should be doing something to protect human life. That what can be greater and more important than protecting human life and helping particularly young women, young couples to say yes to the gift of life and bring life into the world, and to help young couples to see ultimately that living out marriage and sexuality, even if they haven't done that, to be in the place where they are now, to help to encourage them. And again, some of those pregnancy resource centers do even give classes to help encourage these couples, to consider marriage and family, and for those that aren't, married, to really consider what it would look like, to have that stable family that child ultimately needs, is ultimately going to be the best for that child as well. So there's many, many ways that we can participate in the pro-life movement and doing things that are pro-life, but we should be doing something. We should really go to the Lord and pray and ask about ways that we can be of assistance to those who are most in need most vulnerable in our society, those unborn children, and promote the gift of family life, to live life in solid, holy marriages. We certainly need that as well among our youth and young people, to encourage them to participate in married life, to really give themselves to each other through the gift of Christ that they have received, and then to give themselves to each other as Christ calls them to do. And so we thank the Lord for the gift of marriage. We thank him for his beautiful plan for marriage, and we pray that in everything that we do, we will be those who help promote the beauty and the gift of marriage and the gift of life, and that we can help the world to understand that God's ways are the ways to true happiness, God's ways are the ways to true joy, that when we live marriage and sexuality and human life according to God's plan, this is what brings true life, true joy, and true fulfillment.